The young couple, they were in love with this house. I mean, aesthetically, it was a great house. And noticed that some of the joists were bent, cracked. There were some pretty significant structural issues with this house. And I broke it to the husband, and he was like, "Oh, thank God you found that." The missus was in tears because she was so in love with this house. I had to sit down with him and say, "Look, these are the potential issues. This is what you can do to try to negotiate." A lot of it has to do with communication.
Welcome to another episode of Relocation Leader. I'm your host, Zach Turbis, and today we have very special guests. We have Carlo Iannandrea, the VP of Enterprise and Client Development from GlobeSpec. Carlo, we're so glad that you're here, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you guys do?
Sure. Thank you for having me. That's a privilege. We're a home inspection company. We have been in business for 37 years and exclusively servicing the relocation industry. Our owner founded the company around the same time that I started working for a competitor many years ago. But Minor and I knew each other over the years. And when things took a turn at the other company, I joined Minor going on 6 years now. And it's been a great experience. And NEI is actually our largest account. And we're very involved with the process with NEI. And you guys are a great partner. So we provide any type of inspection to survey any condition in any home. So everything from a general home inspection to termites and radon and structurals and all the different trades for HVAC, electrical, plumbing, all that kind of stuff. So anything that you could possibly want to inspect in the house to find out their condition, we can provide.
For the majority of people, I think that everyone kind of generally understands that home inspections are a good thing. I think that back when we were trying to buy a house in 2018, there were people like waiving home inspections right and left just to get into the market, you know? But can you sort of just from a high level explain, like, why do home inspections matter, and especially for relocation?
Sure. Let me cover on the retail side first, because and we saw the same thing that you just described during the pandemic. The real estate market exploded. And so people are waiving inspections because there were so many people lined up to buy the same property, right? So anybody waiving the inspection was actually looked at as a positive. If you're willing to waive the inspection, we'll push you up, right? So a lot of people got into homes that they didn't really understand. So the home inspection is important because when I did retail home inspections back in the day, you're educating the home buyer on the condition of the property, what they can expect to deal with immediately, what needs to be dealt with right now, what big ticket items they might be facing, and then what they might be facing going into the future, the next 5-10 years. You can do some speculation about, those types of things, whether roof is going to be needed, condition of the heating system and all that sort of thing. So it's a good understanding so that you can negotiate with the buyer before you buy, and so that you understand all the things that you're going to be facing over the next few years. Everybody looks at a house aesthetically. We look at the house holistically, and almost like a doctor. Let's figure out what's wrong with it before you make that investment. It is the largest investment that most people make. So we strongly feel, especially on the residential side, on the retail side, that it's important to do that. We understand why sometimes they don't. On the relocation side, our job is to help your clients manage risk. So before they take a house or, possibly bring a house in inventory, they want to know everything that they might be facing, just like a typical buyer would. But now we're dealing with a more sophisticated buyer, somebody with more experience in that environment, that is maybe not as technically proficient as we are, but they understand the real estate market much better than a private buyer might. For relocation, it's really risk management. It's understanding what you're getting into that may become an issue at resale. So that's kind of the arena that we play in, is making sure that we discover as much as possible so that our clients aren't absorbing risk, financial risk at some point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, I know we have clients where it's like, you may have somebody that has moved, 5 times in the last 15 years, and so when you're looking at a person that has such, they're I don't want to say transient, you know, but like they're moving
Sure.
from place to place, and so resale definitely does matter, and you don't want to get into a money pit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there are the dynamics of people who are moving from less expensive areas to more expensive areas and that sort of thing. So it's, yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of dynamics.
So, speaking specifically to GlobeSpec as a company, kind of like what would you say sets you guys apart from like a service standpoint?
Sure. And this is something that I worked for a company that before GlobeSpec that became very big. We touted that we had probably in the neighborhood of 75% of the inspection volume, 75 to 80% of the inspection volume, back when volume was huge in the industry, 10 to 15, 20 years ago. Um, and as the company grew, we had to standardize a lot of things. So it became less customizable and more standard in order to handle all that volume. GlobeSpec, on the other hand, remained small. And Myron's philosophy was always that we have a good, strong client base and we want to maintain that client base. We also want to be able to offer customization and handhold the process as much as possible to help our clients. So we're very involved in some cases in the internal processes with our clients, such as with NEI and some of our other clients, where we're involved in constant discussions about we do an inspection, client has questions, what's the risk? Should we deal with this? Should we do a further evaluation on it? Can we just waive it? What's the risk in this issue? So um, I think by staying small, we've been able to really focus on that sort of personalized service. I think that's really what sets us apart. Anybody in our client's office can reach anybody from a line level person entering an inspection all the way up to Myron, the president of the company. We give out all our cell phone numbers, and anybody is reachable, and there isn't any member of the company that can't just resolve the problem for you. So I think that's what kind of sets us apart.
I think that really marries really well with, you know, the purpose of inspections and relo, like you said, was risk management. And when you have risk management being such a big part of it, you know, the ability to customize or provide a more, you know, elevated level of service, um,
Mhm.
like it kind of goes all hand in hand, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's what actually one of the things that sets us apart with with NEI is the level of care that your account manager, Karen Medding, takes. And I think everybody that works with her will tell you that she is extremely passionate about what she does. She dogs every file until it's taken care of. I do help her with some report reviews and dealing with stuff, but by and large, she's dealing with 95% of the stuff and doing a fantastic job. So, and then, she has resources if she needs to get help.
All right, so I want to know the craziest home that you've ever inspected. Open to
Well,
interpretation.
so I've been in the industry for almost 40 years. So I've seen a lot of different houses. I'll give you three that popped into my mind. So early in my career at the other company, I was the senior technical advisor. So people would come to me with difficult issues, right? And we got an inspection order for a house in California that was built on the side of a cliff. And so you would drive up on the road to a platform with an enclosure, and then you would take an elevator down to the house. And they wanted this trolley elevator thing inspected. We had no idea where to go. So I called Disneyland. And I talked to one of the chief engineers there, and he gave me the names of a couple of private contractors who would be able to do that. And so we went ahead and did that and took care of that. Also in California, we had an executive for Nike who had a very interesting townhouse that had a garage that I don't know if you've seen the Carvana um, buildings that look like car vending machines.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, yeah, yep.
this garage looked something like that, and it had six cars on a rotating platform.
Wow.
This guy there was a board, and he could push which car he wanted, and that would rotate down to the floor level so he could pull it out. So that was an interesting situation. I
Wow.
think my favorite one was in Philadelphia area of Pennsylvania. about 15, 20 years ago. I went, it was a $7.5 million house. It was about 20,000 square feet. It was a very old house. It started out small and then it had been built on over the years. The gentleman who owned the house was 80 some years old. There were three home inspectors, three of us from the same company. There were two structural engineers. There were, there was a whole team of people at this property doing inspections. And he had all the plans laid out. All the permits, anything that had ever done during his ownership was all laid out. He was immaculate. And then he said, let me show you my favorite part. So we went outside and he lifted this metal door on the ground next to the house. And inside was probably about 15 feet down to the bottom. There was a huge water wheel. It was a wooden water wheel that used to distribute water from this house, which was at the top of the hill, to other properties down at the bottom. So it was a water distribution system. It hadn't been for years, but to me, it was one of the most fascinating features I've ever seen in a house.
Wow. I thought you were going to say that it was like a survival bunker or something like that.
I haven't seen those yet, but they're out there.
That was like my next question. It was like, have you ever seen one of those?
I have not personally, and to be honest with you, I haven't seen one in a home inspection we've done for Relo.
I was like, during these times, maybe they'd be in vogue,
But yeah, no kidding, no kidding. I've seen some big wine cellars. I think the biggest one I saw had about 15,000 bottles in it up in Rye, New York, also many years ago. Had quite an expensive collection.
Man, that's crazy. The vending machine one, the car vending machine.
Yeah.
Where can I get one of those? All right, so the craziest homes you've ever inspected, but I'm curious, like, what's the craziest thing you've ever found when you're doing a home inspection?
So I took the cover off of an electrical panel where some of the house circuits had been shut off and they didn't know why, but they couldn't retrip the breaker. So when I opened it up, there was a mouse that was fried between the wires in there. The other thing that's happened to me twice is I climbed up on top of a roof and you look down into the chimney and you have something looking back up at you. So I've had
Oh,
back up at me from inside chimney flues. This didn't happen to me personally, but a colleague of mine found a very expensive coin collection that had been left in a cabinet in the basement. Turned it in, was offered a significant reward. So you could imagine what the value of the coins was, which he refused. We had a house where we went to do a septic inspection, and our guy traced the outlet line to the neighbor's pond. So that was an issue.
dang. What would be like the hardest thing to like break to a potential buyer about the house? Like I'm sure that these people are really excited sometimes. Maybe they find the house that they're really looking for. Um, what's it like to, share something with them that just totally changes how they viewed um not just maybe their house, but also like their trip, and kind of how do you do that in a way that gives them hope, I guess, you know?
Sure. I mean, I think the most difficult one that I had personally was a house that, again, and I said this earlier, it was a young couple, newly married. They were in love with this house. I mean, aesthetically, it was a great house. And then I went in and I started looking around and I removed some acoustic ceiling tiles in the basement and noticed that some of the joists were bent, cracked, and stuff like that. So then I started looking around at some other stuff. There were some pretty significant structural issues with this house that they hadn't anticipated, that we discovered by doing some, slightly invasive things. But and I broke it to the husband, and he was like, "Oh, thank God you found that," and unfortunately, the missus was in tears because she was so in love with this house, and so it was almost like like a counseling session where I
Mhm.
had to sit down with him and say, "Look, these are the potential issues. This is what you can do to try to negotiate." Although, there are a lot of other houses too, so you may want to consider looking at some more options or whatever. So, a lot of it has to do with communication. How you communicate the issue, and try to assure the customer that you're doing this and it's in their best interest.
When you got into the role, did you know that you would need bedside manner?
I was told, actually, my mentor at the time, who was one of the early founders of the American Society of Home Inspectors, really, really good guy. One of the first things he said to me was, "You're a good communicator, and that's 90% of the job." He said,
Mhm.
"You're expected to have all the technical knowledge. It's how you deliver the information that's important." And so he impressed that on me very early.
So again, we're in relocation. How does that come across in relocation? Like, why is that so much more important, even um, in our industry?
And that's a good question because there is a disconnect where, when I'm doing an inspection for a buyer and they're walking around the house with me, even if the seller is there, they're hearing me talk about the issues and the things that they need to be concerned and all that kind of stuff. They're going to get a copy of that report and all that. And so everybody's sort of communicating on site. In relocation, that's different. Our inspector is not allowed to talk to the transferring employee because technically they're not our customer. We have to treat them with good manners and customer service and treat the property respectfully and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, our customer is NEI and your corporate client. That's who we're trying to protect. So nothing is communicated to the transferee up front. Um, so little things like we ask inspectors not to do, and I learned this the hard way a couple times early on, is do not make any comments to the transferee that could be interpreted as my house is great. I had somebody ask me, "How's it going?" And I said, "It's going great." And
Mm.
that translated into I have a perfect house. So when I delivered a report with, a bunch of different problems, the issue was, well, he told me that the house was great. So
Yeah.
I don't understand why he found all these problems now. Um, so a lot of the communication doesn't happen. So transferees tend to look at us almost as adversaries in some cases. We're coming into their house and finding all kinds of problems. We're the least popular guys in the relocation process, I think.
Hmm.
Just fine. um, but then after the fact, how we communicate it, and I take a lot of pride in this, is when our relocation clients come back and say, "Look, the transferee has these issues. They're disputing this. They're pushing back on that," is how to communicate responses that can just about be handed to the transferring employee to, number one, give perspective to the issue, justify why it's an issue, and give them the assurance that we're not just calling stuff out to hurt you. This is an issue that needs to be dealt with. So, knowing what you're talking about, doing the research and providing the right answers and anticipating possible questions that might come up from those answers is important. So a lot of it is communication.
How often do you find something that is a deal breaker in a home?
For us, that's sort of a tough question
Hmm.
because I think so. So some companies will exclude a property if it has synthetic stucco, for example. So that could be considered a deal breaker on the relocation side, right? I think in many cases, relocation companies will look at big ticket items like big structural issues, 25, 30, 40, $50,000 structural issues as we probably don't, we probably want to stay away from this, right? This is probably a deal breaker for us. Um, or, require the repair and then, get into all of that kind of stuff. So we don't know, from a traditional perspective, when buyers come into these properties and they're in your inventory, we don't know what's breaking the deal at that point because we're no longer involved.
I'm curious, what are some of the things that are rarely talked about, but are important to understand? Maybe that's from like the buyer or seller side, but maybe it's from like the corporate mobility manager side.
Sure. So, and this is something that I used to talk about a lot during trainings that I did, is the fact that as a home inspection provider for the relocation industry, we're kind of caught between two spots, right? So when we go out to do the inspection and we're working pre-acquisition of the property, um, the consultant, the account management team would love for us to have clear inspections all day long, right? They don't want to deal with the problems.
Hmm.
It's difficult to communicate that to a transferee. And so they would love clear inspections. Now, we provide the inspection, we go through all that stuff. Now the property's acquired. Now the resale team wonders why we didn't condemn the house, right? Because now all these buyers inspections are coming in and finding all this other stuff. And we do deal with that. We have a product called a major component assessment, that the client can use to limit what items are inspected. So not everything in an traditional ERC inspection will show up on the report. But they also have to understand that somebody else is still going to come and do an inspection that doesn't have any of those limitations, and they may end up taking the risk at resale.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of companies that are comfortable doing that. So we have a number of these types of policies. But I think the understanding that two things, what I said before is who our customer is. So yes, we have to treat the transferee with respect, treat their property with respect, but our customer is the relocation company and the corporate client. And then also the difference between the two environments where in pre-acquisition, we're looked at a certain way. And then once the house goes into resale, then it almost becomes sort of an adversarial situation where any other inspector that comes in and finds something different becomes a disputing inspection. So, and then, we go through those meticulously. And, what we tell our teams is if you can find a good justification for why it wasn't an issue at the time of our inspection, great. Otherwise, we come to the table and we say, look, we probably overlooked this. What do we need to do to make it right? We try to make that process as smooth as possible.
Not that you guys do this, but what would a poorly managed inspection look like? And then how does that hurt like the client?
So and we've had situations, admittedly, after doing tens of thousands of inspections, right, where you hire somebody who does, a haphazard job, right? So, um, just goes through the checklist, doesn't give you any detail, doesn't give you a lot of photographs, et cetera. Now, that property comes into inventory, and you get all these buyer's inspections with disputes and that. Um, that creates time delays, number one, because now you have to figure out what went wrong. Got to figure out, did we miss it? Did we not miss it? So now the transferee's life is on hold while we try to adjudicate all that stuff, right? And in some cases, it's going to cost the corporate client money, and it may cost GlobeSpec money. It may cost NEI money to resolve this issue and get it through resale. So a poor inspection creates financial risk ultimately. I mean, there is a chance that it could create some safety issues for the occupants, but we haven't been involved in any situations like that. Those are fairly rare, where you lease something that's so dangerous that somebody gets hurt and then the lawsuits come. That's fairly rare.
Nice. And you've spoken a little bit to this already, but kind of what are the qualities of a good inspector then?
Sure. So I think, as I said, I think the technical aspect of it is expected. So understanding how a house is built, from the foundation up, from the digging of the foundation all the way up, condition of the soil, all that stuff. Having a solid understanding of all of that, how materials interact. And then the most important thing, I think, is an understanding of how materials and components fail, because that's what we're really looking for. Is, at what ages, at what conditions, what are the visual evidence pieces that you're looking for. That's important. In relocation, the communication is all about how you write that report, what photos you took and how you describe the problem, because we're not there. So it's extremely important to have good detail, because we're not there. We're going to curate an inspection for a client who also wasn't there. So we want to have as much information as possible. So although they're not communicating verbally with the transferee about the issues in the house or whatnot, how they write the report is extremely important. So technical knowledge and communication, I think, are the two most important things.
So, Carlo, could you tell me a little bit about kind of like how the inspection industry has thought about technology in the past and maybe how it's thinking about technology now?
There are a lot of inspectors that are using thermographic cameras, infrared cameras. Some know what they're doing, some don't. We had at my old company, we had a pretty strict training process for that. And we had somebody who was an expert in the subject matter, who was buying the equipment, training the inspectors, and then, having them use it and then reviewing all of their work. So, beyond the pretty pictures that you get from a thermographic camera, you need to be able to interpret what that means. What do the colors mean? What could be causing that problem, et cetera. Otherwise, it's just an alarmist tool, right? So, every time you see red, it's an issue. Why? I don't know. So, I mean, you could literally have people ripping drywall off of walls looking for problems that don't exist. So you
Mhm.
really need to know what you're talking about with thermographic cameras. Um, Drones are an interesting one. A lot of inspectors are starting to use drones to inspect roofs. The problem with that is that most of them are using the drones too high up. So we're getting a great footprint of the roof line, but I can't see any detail, right? So unless they're able to bring it down closer and do high definition close up of different, flashings and all that kind of stuff, I still think it's something that needs work. I think it's an easy thing to say, oh, cool, now I don't have to get on the roof on a ladder and I just use this thing. And but we're getting back a lot of field data that isn't helpful. So, we feed back to them and let them know how to improve that. I don't know where artificial intelligence will take this. I would argue that eventually maybe this gets cracked. I think anything replaces the critical eye of somebody with experience looking at houses, the human being that knows exactly what they're looking at, and have the experience to recognize issues. Does artificial intelligence help in some ways? I think the only way that may become a good tool is in report writing, how you're curating a report. That may be helpful. But right now, I don't see a lot of other opportunity for AI in the physical inspection process.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Um, yeah, I imagine it could be really hard. They might be able to figure something out once a lot of the robotics catch up,
Yeah.
But I think you're right though. Like there is something to be said about keen eyes and lots of experience.
hmm We did use, I have used in past work, 3D cameras. And
Mm,
so I worked with organizations that were basically institutional buyers of property, right? So companies that were investing and buying lots of different properties and either leasing them out for rent or reselling them. And one of the requirements for a couple of those companies was to do 3D imaging. So we'd go in a house and set up these iPhone loaded tripods and do all these 3D things. The 3D technology is really cool because it takes very good photos, and it also can create floor plans with
mhm.
measurement and all kinds of other stuff. So it's pretty cool. It's expensive, and so we thought about how can we utilize this in relocation. Unfortunately, in relocation, the name of the game is trying to control costs. And those sorts of tools are very expensive and would increase the cost exponentially and not give you, enough benefit, I don't think, for what you're getting.
Yeah,
Great for like, Zillow and, real estate companies that are selling properties and stuff like that for their virtual tours and all that sort of thing.
yeah. Those are definitely helpful for the virtual tours, but it's like if the same thing can be done with an actual person to get your
Yeah.
inspection done, it's like sometimes I feel like people use technology. It's like for redundant purposes. It's like, why did you need to do that?
Yeah, no,
you
exactly.
know?
And you're right. I mean, that's one of the things we look at is, is this tool of value if because now I have to charge more for it, right? Am I bringing
Mm,
good return to my customer by using this tool or not?
yeah.
And that was my argument with thermographic stuff early on, was everybody was asking us, why don't you guys do, infrared cameras? Like, nobody knows how to interpret the data. And
Mhm.
so that's caught up now. So now, we're a little bit more sophisticated in that area. But you haven't seen it take off as much because people are having to pay for it and they're not seeing the value.
Yeah.
It's very specialized. So
Hmm. All right. So, um, what would you say? And do you guys do work outside of the U.S. as well, or no? Just
we cover
U.S.
Canada and then American territories like we do Puerto Rico and that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Okay.
And outside of that, we're just Americas, North America.
So, what would you say is like, so when your team needs to inspect a home in an unfamiliar environment, what sort of extra steps do you have to take to make sure that you can ensure like consistency and accuracy?
Sure. So And we do that quite a bit. We do service a lot of remote properties for, certain companies have, we used to do um, Bureau of Prisons, for example, and they had a lot of really sort of random remote locations, oil companies as well, up in Canada. And so what we do is we typically start by asking somebody that we know if they know somebody in the area that might be reputable. If not, then we go to, if we're dealing with a home inspection, we'll go to the home inspection association and try to pick from their list somebody who's qualified, certified, has all their continuing education credits up to date, all that kind of stuff. We also go to Better Business Bureau, any of the review bureaus, and nowadays, in a lot of cases, you can go on Google and get reviews of how people are performing. Right. When we do trades inspections, we go to the trades organizations and try to pick from there. Who are your most reputable people, and that sort of thing. Um, and and then through the onboarding process, the interview process, how do they communicate? Are they willing to use the forms that we're using? Um, are they willing to follow the rules of engagement that we use in relocation? For example, going, a trade electrician going to a house, doing an inspection and not making it seem like they're finding problems in order to get work.
Mm.
So there's non-solicitation agreements and that sort of thing. Um, so it's a very involved process to get somebody on board in a remote area. And then still, it's like interviewing somebody for a desk job. You don't really know until they're sitting at the desk doing the job, right? So that first inspection or that second, those first couple of inspections are critical that we can look and either train the person or decide they're not fit to move forward with us.
Okay, so I'm curious. What's the single most common issue that transferees um, tend to overlook when moving into a newly inspected home?
We see a lot of folks who move into houses and they've negotiated credits and they understand that there's issues with the house or whatever. And now they move into the house and they get comfortable and don't make those repairs.
Yeah.
They don't take care of those issues. And so now those issues exacerbate. They get worse. And now, 2, 3 years later, we're coming in and looking at some of the stuff that could have been taken care of 3, 4 years ago. And now it's much worse. So I think a lot of it is making sure that, whatever, like I described earlier, whatever your private home inspector told you needed attention, give it that attention, right?
Yeah.
And then do what, and I'm also guilty of this, most homeowners are, is making sure that you maintain your property. Um, we all do our best to do that, but we let a lot of things, in a lot of cases, we let things go and they become problematic. So I think
Yeah.
I can't think of any specific issue, but I think that as an overall is like once you move into the house and there are problems, take care of those problems before they become worse and maintain the house.
What are some of the things on the horizon that you're kind of keeping an eye out for right now?
A few years ago, I had started keeping up with new technologies, smart home technology, solar technology, all that kind of stuff, because we're starting to see a lot more of this at these properties, and some of them are controlling systems and all that kind of stuff. So we need to educate ourselves about how those systems work, what could go wrong, and making sure the inspectors that we send out to properties understand them too. Because you have situations where if you don't understand a smart thermometer, you might mess something up and, you know, put the system out of cycle or whatever.
Mhm.
So, understanding that all of those sorts of things. I think one of the things that we're really watching is more on the climate side, um, where you're seeing more and more and stronger storms. Florida has become a hotspot for this discussion. And I'll keep it brief, but in Florida, what you're seeing is insurance companies that are kind of raising the flag, and they're making a lot of payouts because of claims. So several companies have pulled out. There are specialty inspections that are being done by the insurance industry that differ from retail home inspections and ERC home inspections that are more stringent to determine whether they're going to provide a policy or determine what the premium is going to be, et cetera. So we're starting to see a lot more of that. How's insurability? of properties in Florida is becoming a real issue. So we're telling clients to keep your eyes wide open on that. Talk to your closing services, talk to your local brokers, talk to your attorneys, figure out what you need to do to protect yourself in those things. So that's something that's actively happening now with a lot of clients. And I know NEI is looking at this as well. And then on top of that, in Florida was the collapse of the Champlain Tower in Surfside, Florida, a few years ago.
Yeah,
That
I remember that.
Yeah, so that prompted the state to initiate these engineering studies for properties that are any condominium buildings within 3 miles of the shoreline that are 30 years and over. And now that threshold is coming down. Depending on the local authorities, they're determining whether it should be 20 years or 15 years or whatever. A couple of buildings have been shut down and evacuated because of this. So it's a real issue. What that's doing is it's creating some issues with condominium owners and whether they can resell these things. We're hearing, and we hear a lot of the stuff in the news. And so that's another thing that I throw out to my clients. I send them some of the links of stuff that's in the news and couch it as, I don't know if this is real or hype because we're not on the ground there, but these are the things that are being said. So make sure that you understand that some homeowners are being handed assessments of $10,000, $20,000 because they need to catch up to the repairs that need to be done in the building. That's for every homeowner in the building, right? And in some cases, they're being told they have to pay it now. It's not something that's preferred. So that's happening. So based on that, we're kind of looking at all of the Gulf area, um, wondering when Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, if they'll start feeling some of that. And then in California, of course, with all everything that goes on there. I mean, they pretty much run the gamut with disasters out there. Um, so that I think that's one of the things that we're really watching and trying to advise our clients.
One of the things I was trying to wrap my head around too is, um, in home inspections, the attention to detail is probably enormous. Like you said, there's communication skills. When you're looking at some of the skills that it takes to be a good home inspector, what are some things from a professional standpoint that kind of cross over into other professional categories where like we could learn from you guys for like how to grow professionally?
For the people who are truly passionate about it, and I love the subject matter, is be as knowledgeable as you can about every aspect of what you're doing. And if you don't know, admit it, but then go find out what the answer is. That I think that carries to any profession, right? But especially one where you're impacting somebody's financial situation. I think it's very important to be, and again, this can be in any industry, detail oriented, ethical,
Yeah.
and a communicator, not alarmist. That's one of the things that I learned early on in home inspections is you're treading in, very difficult environment in some cases where, you're in front of the homeowner, criticizing their house, trying to communicate to your customer what they need to be concerned with, but doing that all in a way that is neither alarmist, not too soft, just the right words and the right attitude to communicate what needs to be communicated. So I can't say enough about in everything that we do throughout the entire organization. I think communication is the number one thing that everybody needs to focus on. And I think that transfers to anything that anybody does.
Nice. So we have time for a few fun questions. I kind of saved these ones for last, and you don't get to see them. Um, but I I know that you've done some vacationing. Tell me, what are some vacation spots that if I had to go tomorrow, like where should I go?
Well, and I think in past conversation, you mentioned that you've done stuff out west. Have you been to Sedona?
No. So I mean, I I actually do think that I lived in one of the best places in the world. So I lived in the Central Coast in California, but and spent a lot of time between Ventura and more like Monterey Bay, all up and down the PCH.
Like,
But
you,
when you live there, you don't really see the need to travel like anywhere else kind of thing. But no, I have not.
I think Sedona, Arizona, and there's a lot of beautiful places in this country. We've been to just about every national park.
Hmm.
But Sedona, to me, is one of the most spectacularly beautiful places in the country. Great place to go any time of the year. We've been there in the winter, in the snow. We've been there in the warmer weather. We just drove through there a few months ago. Um, as far as people have asked me, so what's your favorite place that you've been? That's an impossible question to answer. I think the unique things that we've done is we did a safari in Tanzania. So we spent 10 days going to different areas in Africa and Tanzania. And it was like living in an episode of National Geographic. It was absolutely amazing, the stuff that we saw and how close we got to stuff and that sort of thing. And then we went to Zanzibar for a couple of days, which is a fascinating place. Um, we hiked the Inca Trail for 2 days into Machu Picchu several years ago. That was probably one of the hardest hikes we've ever done, but one of the most rewarding when you get there. So um, we we've done paragliding. We jumped off 7,000 feet from Mont Blanc in France last year.
Wow.
We've done hot air ballooning, and we went to Cappadocia, Turkey, and hot air ballooned around an incredible area there. So I think if I was going to tell you to go see one place, you mentioned Greece as well. Greece is a fantastic, gorgeous place, and I love the people there. That's a great, easy one to pick. Um, but I fell in love with Turkey. We went to Istanbul, and then we
Yeah.
went to a couple of different regions where we flew out to different spots. Cappadocia is off the hook. I mean, if I had to recommend one place for somebody to see in their life, I would say go there. And there's, whether you're interested in this or not, there's a tremendous amount of Christian biblical history in that area, including dwellings that have been carved into the sandstone cliffs. And you walk into these things, and there's full chapels with frescoes and all kinds of stuff that
Wow.
are near since the early in the millennium. So
I
just
think that
fascinating stuff.
I think that like, when you're done with the inspections, you have a career ahead of you in guided tours.
My wife can do all the planning. She plans all of our trips from start to finish.
Yeah.
Uh, so sometime I'll maybe when we're at GPA, I'll hand you my phone and you can go through my camera. There's some really cool stuff in there.
Nice.
But we did Iceland. We went ice caving in Iceland, and I mean just really really cool stuff.
Yeah. What's the fastest car you've ever driven?
Fastest car?
Yeah.
Gosh, well, I don't know that it was the fastest car, and my wife isn't here, but when we were in Turkey, there are no speed limits on some of the roads.
That's what I'm
Uh,
talking about.
yeah, right. And the thing about that is that people actually know how to drive. They're like,
Yeah.
nobody in the left lane, nobody's on a phone, nobody's eating, everybody's driving, which I thought
Yeah.
was fascinating. They're very focused on their driving. And I got up to about 125 miles an hour on the highway there, and somebody passed me. So
Yeah.
it's like the Autobahn, but in Turkey. Super like beautiful, smooth, wide roads, and you can in after a while you don't even feel how fast you're going.
Wow.
Um, but also the favorite place to drive. It was a
Yeah.
Turkey.
The Now we know where you're gonna retire. All right. All right. Last question. Okay, I promise. So if you were gonna DIY upgrade your house in such a way that it wouldn't pass inspection, but it would be really cool, what would you do?
I would probably we live up on a hill. It's basically a ranch house. It's a mid-century house with a low slope roof. But if you go up the back of my house, up over a berm, you can see the city of Harrisburg. It,
Hmm.
it At night it looks gorgeous. We can see fireworks, the Fourth of July fireworks from our backyard
Hmm.
from the back there. Um, and if I was going to do anything to the house, I would probably build a rooftop deck.
Nice.
But I'm not sure that that's a good idea on this type of roof. But
Have Tim Taylor build it.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
So,
Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on and being our guest, Carlo. I had a fascinating discussion. I didn't think we could have such a fascinating discussion about home inspections, but you did it. Good job.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a good subject if you're passionate about it, and I happen to be. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and thank you for all the support as well.
That was another episode of Relocation Leader, and thank you guys for joining. We will see you back in 2 weeks.